The Holy Book of Thoth, Great Arcana of the Tarot, Absolute Principles of the Synthetic Philosophy of Esotericism, Vladimir Shmakov. The coming era is infinitely different from the one that has just passed. It is a time of turning point, summing up, searching for new paths, identifying new goals. All types of thinking, all branches of science, have experienced a complete internal revolution. They have changed so much that sometimes they are associated with the past only by the name. For a man who stands outside these new ideas, this great change in the history of the world passes without a trace, but he cannot help feeling it, for a revolution in essence corresponds to a revolution in form. The development of means of communication, the decline in the influence of everyday life, the commonality of forms of life in different states, the diminution of the importance of borders, the attempts to create an international language, the internationality of a number of organizations, the depersonalization of the authorities, both central and local, through their modification into anonymous societies. All this is an inferior external reflection of the spiritual desire of mankind for synthesis, for the destruction of individual forms. The Great War, which floods the world with an ocean of blood, sweeps away peoples and changes all life on earth. It is only a faint echo of the great struggle that takes place in the consciousness of universal humanity at the collision of two great epochs, infinitely different from each other. As Vladimir Solovyov says, according to the law of the division of historical labor, the same cultural type, the same peoples cannot realize two world ideas, do two historical deeds. And if Western civilization had as its task, its world purpose, to make a negative transition from the religious past to the religious future, then another historical force is destined to begin this very religious future. Our time is a convergence of what so recently seemed completely opposite, forever divided by the irreconcilability of contradictions. Science and religion, which for so long had only a potential connection through philosophy, now increasingly converge on a surprise to note the unity of world views. Just as in the field of positive searching reason began to go deep into the search for synthesis, so in the religious sphere people began to go into mysticism, into the innermost essence of religious teachings. The final synthesis cannot be one, and therefore the final mysticism and the final scientific synthesis are inextricably linked with each other. Both of them result in an absolute teaching, one, but differently refracted into scientific reason and religious reason. The mysteries of nature, says the Hierophant of Thrace, are the same as the mysteries of religion, and there can be only one doctrine, for there is only one principle of beings. We feel by the impulse of our genius that man is born to know, but we must also read the nature and qualities of beings by their shells. To be able to read these signs is the first degree of science. But this nature and these qualities have a similarity that must also be understood, and these signs are more difficult to read, which is the second degree of science. But to strip the beings from their shells, to see them as they are, is the last degree of science, and few achieve it. Only then does a person become powerful, both in words and in works. The schism between religion and science, which was founded by the humanists, reached its peak at the end of the 19th century. It was at this time that positivism and mysticism became the opposite poles of human thought, not only declaring war on each other, but also beginning to ignore each other altogether, which is, of course, the highest degree of irreconcilability. The unity of the ultimate truth cannot fail to result in the general uniformity of the ways of approaching it. For all the diversity of the individual forms, their entire totality cannot fail to be imbued with an inner unity, which is reflected in the harmony of the total system of all the individual paths. Positivism and mysticism, in their final stages of development, lead us to the knowledge of two aspects of the human spirit, two methods of its self-affirmation. Both the one and the other in their true nature represent the realization of the basic aspiration of the human spirit to know itself, both in the essence and in the regularity of its differentiated nature. Being identical in this aspect of consciousness, they are in another aspect opposite to each other. Positivism is the desire of the human spirit to know itself in the synthesis of differential nature, created by external experience in the world of phenomena. Because of this, the external form of positive cognition is always objective, that is, in other words, the data, the criterion, and the very regularity of conclusions in it are always directly based on and derived from the external truth, the world of phenomena. In complete contrast to this, mysticism is the desire of the human spirit to know itself in the synthesis of the differential nature by inner experience, that is, by experience. The consistent identification of certain aspects of the self with the phenomena of the external world, and the affirmation of the latter as phenomena arising from the noumenal spirit, and therefore having only an illusory existence according to the law of the environment. Because of this, the external form of mystical cognition is always adequate, that is, in other words, the data, the criterion, and the very regularity of conclusions in it are always directly based on and derived from the inner truth, from the direct self-consciousness of the spirit. Both types of self-awareness complement and affirm each other. Separately, each of them has only relative freedom, because the development of the consciousness of the spirit in the two corresponding aspects tends to be parallel and allows only differentially small fluctuations. A perfect person should follow both paths equally, combining them in perfect harmony. A true magician is equally omniscient both in the fields of mysticism and in the field of positive knowledge, and it is the combination of these two currents of human thought that is the sign that defines the very concept of a magician. Being inseparable in their true nature, positivism and mysticism, represented by their adherents, have diverged from each other through mutual misunderstanding. In essence, this discrepancy was only visible, illusory, because the essence of phenomena does not depend on a person, and he can only change the name. When the representatives of positivism and mysticism were completely absorbed in the external form of these basic currents of human thought, and did not want to perceive or even hear another teaching, they each created a division in their own environment, quite similar to that which positivism and mysticism assert in the realm of the spirit itself. The first-class representatives of positive science could not help but feel the mystical path, but they either hid these experiences altogether or left them in an undeveloped form, such as in the cases, for example, of Newton, Pascal, Kepler, Descartes, and many others. Only a little knowledge removes us from God, but a great one brings us closer to him again, said the first of them. And in this sealed the well-known historical fact that all the great men of science and history were believers. These giants of positive thought represent the mystical pole of positivism. The secondary workers in the field of positive science often became entangled in the grandiosity and diversity of the world of phenomena, and forgot even their own searching spirit in the midst of this diversity. If the titans of science, armed with knowledge, sought to ascend it, its artisans sometimes began to see the sky where the sensitivity of their measuring instruments ended. They did not understand the nature of synthesis, which is perceived through the incessant increase in the depths of concepts and the transitions to the higher by analogy, without violating the nature of categories, They considered synthesis as totality. They defined it as an aggregate of individual laws. This includes the representatives of the quasi-rationalist schools of materialism and atheism, such as Buchner, Haeckel, Strauss, and others. In their totality, they represent the positive pole of positivism. The true bearers of the mystical banner, who knew the world with direct spiritual consciousness, are unknown to history. Their greatness and true life are revealed only from esoteric traditions and symbols, from the ineffable charm that these adepts had, both in their time and in the course of subsequent centuries, on all mankind. Such are the unknown sages of the Himalayas and the mysterious hierophants of Egypt. We do not know their own lives, their own aspirations and achievements, but by the enormity of their luminous influence on humanity, we can mentally imagine the immensity of their own greatness. They lived outside and above life, but nothing passed without their mysterious influence. They comprehended quite the great gift of invisible control of the mental life of mankind through the dazzling brilliance of the tablets of eternal truth that they proclaimed. These true adherents of mysticism represent its positive pole. Like positivism, among the mystics of the last centuries, the vast majority have completely immersed themselves in the world of phenomena. But despite the identity of the nature they studied, the positivists of positivism and the positivists of mysticism approached from different angles. Knowing the spirit and all-encompassing nature of his reign, the mystics could not be completely absorbed in forms of phenomena, but at the same time, they sometimes involuntarily forgot their ultimate goal and devoted their entire energies to the development of specific issues. Following the deductive path, the mystics turned to the study of differential nature and became so absorbed in it that their research lost all connection with synthesis, and, from the outside, they became quite similar to the narrow positivists. This includes the vast majority of both medieval and modern mystics. In their totality, they represent the negative pole of mysticism. Summarizing the above, we see that the representatives of the evolving human thought were divided into four large groups through the dismemberment of positivism and mysticism, in turn into two polar opposite poles. The lowest group is the representatives of positive positivism, followed by mystical positivism, then positive mysticism, and finally mystical mysticism. The representatives of positive positivism have failed completely by the very force of the evolution of positive science, as we have shown at the beginning of this preface. It can be said that this group exists only in the historical past. Now it does not exist at all, and only those who have not heard the greatest discoveries of human genius in the last quarter of a century can doubt this. The school of positive mysticism openly began to proclaim what had so recently been ridiculed by narcissistic ignorance. Combining all the experience of positive research of humanity, this school at the same time is in full swing to merge with the adherents of mysticism. A number of well-known scientists are convinced by the logic of their experiments alone of the reality of much of the realm of mysticism. Myers says, I wish to point out that the emotional creed of educated men is becoming divorced from their scientific creed. That just as the old orthodoxy of religion was too narrow to contain men's knowledge, so now the new orthodoxy of materialistic science is too narrow to contain their feelings and aspirations, and consequently that just as the fabric of religious orthodoxy used to be strained and overpassed in order to admit the discoveries of geology or astronomy, so now also the obvious deductions of materialistic science are strained and overpassed in order to give sanction to feelings and aspirations which it is found impossible to ignore. If positive positivism has already completely fulfilled its task, and therefore has gone into the realm of shadows, then mystical positivism still retains its vitality, completing its mission, but its days are already numbered. The mysticism of the Middle and New Ages in Europe developed into a very special form, peculiar to it alone, and sharply distinguishing it from the mysticism of the ancient world. The first thing that catches your eye is the lack of a self-sufficient philosophy. If the history of antiquity is the history of philosophical systems, then on the contrary, all European mysticism is imbued with an attachment to a Semitic cosmogony, truly worthy of a better fate. European mysticism did not create anything original, nor did it create anything that had anything to do with the world of causes. It not only forgot all the many colours of the ancient esoteric teachings, but even lost the memory of the philosophical and religious systems of India, going so far as to completely ignore everything that was not contained in the mysticism of Hebraism. All the efforts of the medieval and modern mystics were limited to the special development of specific questions, individual theories, but they also covered these studies with such a thick veil of esotericism for some unknown reason that indeed it can be said that it is easier to recreate any of the mystical theories yourself than to decipher the multi-volume and foggy folios of the latest mystics. When comparing the ancient mysticism that has come down to us, even the Puranas and Upanishads of India, with the dark intricacies of Paracelsus, Postel, Italia and others, it is involuntarily striking that while antiquity says is a living verb that has power, so, on the contrary, the living spirit has long since departed from the modern mystic. Trembling for the ultimate and absolute truth, the ancient Hindu retreated into the depths of his pure spirit, reduced his whole being into a single volitional synthesis, forgot his personality, and on the mighty wings of the proud self-consciousness of his I, soared into the boundless ocean of the one universal spirit, dreaming of its Maya, the ever-changing, ever-trembling aggregate of infinite properties, potential forms, the various modes of his self-consciousness. The Hindu rejected everything. He sought only reality. He longed for it, and he found it. The ancient Hindu, like the ancient Egyptian, floated in eternity with his spirit. He enjoyed the happiness of anticipating the ultimate dignity of the divine perfect man, who realized himself in everything, confirmed himself in everything, renounced everything, plunged into nothing, and became everything. The Hindus and Egyptians loved science, but their knowledge was life itself. Rejecting form in principle, they knew how to realize their views, and with their mighty spirit, they reduced it to a perfect illusion. Their science, their knowledge, was the bulwark of freedom. They filled their spirit with a great expanse. They gave the key to real laws. They gave real power. The European mystics of our era were the true personification of impotence. From mouth to mouth they passed on secrets as ancient as was the world, carefully protecting them from uninvited prying eyes, naively and boldly thinking that the preservation of the truth and its purity by the rough hands of the ignorant may depend on their personal actions. The mystery became a sport for them, the esotericism of all truth, as the natural lot of the spirit's only summoned aristocracy, was understood by them as the concealment of treasure from predators. They had saved the treasure, but the years of keeping it in the ground had done their work, and when they first tried to unearth it, they could not help but see that it had all rotted away. By hiding, they could only hide from themselves. They did so, and so they became the laughing-stock of their doom. Religion is divided into external and internal, as well as the schools of wisdom are divided into external and internal. The external possess the letter of hieroglyphs, and the internal the spirit and meaning. The external religion is connected with the internal rites. The external school of mysteries is connected with the internal hieroglyphs. Sons of truth, there is only one order, a single brotherhood, a single union of like-minded people whose goal is to master the light, and only unreason has raised up countless orders from this center. Multiplicity lies in the rites of the outer, and truth only in the inner. The multiplicity of fraternities depends on the variety of hieroglyphic interpretations according to time, needs, and circumstances. The true brotherhood of light can only be one. All errors, all schisms, all misunderstandings, everything that gives rise to so many errors in religions and secret societies refers exclusively to the letter, and the spirit remains inviolable and holy. All this applies to the outer cover, on which hieroglyphs, ceremonies, and rites are written, and does not concern the inner one at all. Our desire, our chain, our duty, is to revive the dead letter everywhere, to give the soul to hieroglyphs everywhere, and to give the lifeless signs a living truth everywhere, to make the inactive active and the dead alive everywhere. But we are able to do all this not by ourselves, but by the spirit of that light which is the wisdom, love, and light of the world, and which wants to become our spirit and our light. Until now, the innermost sanctuary was separated from the temple, and the temple was besieged by those in the vestibule. There comes a time when the innermost sanctuary must connect with the temple, so that those who are in the temple can influence those who are in the vestibule, until the vestibules are thrown out. In our secret sanctuary, all the mysteries of the Spirit and truth were preserved in purity, and it could never be defiled by the profane or stained by the ungodly. This sanctuary is invisible, just as an invisible force is known only by its action. In our school, you can learn everything, for our mentor is the light itself and its spirit. Our sciences are the heritage promised to the chosen ones, or to those who are able to receive the light, and the knowledge of our sciences is the fullness of the divine union with the children of men. Eckhart Hausen. There is nothing new in the world. Human civilization is moving in a spiral, and from century to century, people follow the same paths, only differently coloring them according to their individual characteristics. The history we know embraces only a tiny part of the true full history. It has not preserved the memory of the former brilliant eras of human life and activity, both in the world of the spirit and in the world of the mind. The truth and the striving for it, man, are eternal. As a reality, it cannot but be one. That is why the highest knowledge, drawn from the hidden regions of the spirit, cannot depend on external conditions. The immutability of the essence must result in the immutability of the mind. The teaching of truth has been continuous in the course of the ages. It has outlived not only the race that first ascended to it, but also the very memory of it. From century to century, it has been preserved by its servants, who are the true representatives of the aristocracy of the spirit. Imprinted in symbols, it has come down to us in the most ancient monument of human thought, the origin of which is lost in the fog of centuries. This monument is the holy book of Thoth, the great arcana of the tarot. Through the veil of all the hierarchical and mystical allegories of the ancient teachings, through the darkness and bizarre trials of all initiations, behind the seal of all the sacred writings on the ruins of Nineveh and Thebes, as well as on the time-worn stones of ancient temples, on the blackened faces of the sphinxes of Assyria and Egypt, in the monstrous or miraculous drawings that translate the sacred pages of the Vedas for the believers of India, in the strange emblems of our old alchemical books, in the reception ceremonies practiced by all the mysterious societies. Everywhere we find traces of a single doctrine, everywhere identical, everywhere carefully concealed. Occult philosophy seems to have been the nurse or godmother of all religions, the secret lever of all intellectual powers, the key to all divine mysteries, and the absolute ruler of society in the years when it was exclusively intended for the enlightenment of high priests and kings. She reigned in Persia with the magicians who perished as the masters of the world perish who have abused their power. She endowed India with the most wonderful traditions and the incredible luxury of poetry, the charm and horror of her emblems. She enlightened Greece with the sound of Orpheus's lyre. In the bold calculations of Pythagoras, she put the final principles of all the sciences and all the successes of the human spirit. She filled the fairy tale with her miracles. History, as soon as it took up the study of this unknown power, was itself transformed into a fairy tale. With her oracles she shook or confirmed empires, made tyrants pale on their thrones, and dominated all minds, enticing them with her mystery or bending them with fear. For this science, the crowd said, nothing is impossible. It commands the elements, knows the language of the stars. The moon falls bloody from the sky at its call. The dead rise from their graves, repeating the sepulchral whisper of the night wind passing through their skulls. The ruler of love and hate, science, can deliver heaven or hell to the hearts of people at will. It disposes of all forms entirely, and distributes beauty and ugliness as it pleases. With the wand of Circe, it also transforms men into cattle and animals into men. It disposes even of life and death, and can bring riches to its adepts by the transmutation of metals, and immortality by its quintessence and its elixir composed of gold and light. This is what magic was from Zoroaster to Manes, from Orpheus to Apollonius of Tyana, before positive Christianity, having finally triumphed over the beautiful dreams and grandiose aspirations of the Alexandrian school, dared to publicly strike this philosophy with its anathemas, and thus forced it to become even more hidden and mysterious than ever before. Eliphas Levi. Countless generations of people have passed into eternity since man first realized his royal dignity on earth. The very names of the tribes and peoples gradually became obscured over the centuries and disappeared into their darkness. The all-consuming time has blotted out forever from our consciousness even the thought of the possibility of fixing our mental gaze on the hoary antiquity of mankind. It is rightly said that if the history of mankind lasts for a day, then we hardly know the last 5 seconds. Egypt, China, Babylon, India, these are the limits beyond which the inquisitive eye of the historian cannot penetrate. Epics, legends, and myths illuminate a few more millennia into the depths of the centuries, then everything is shrouded in impenetrable darkness. Countless times, even in the relatively insignificant period of world history known to us, the names of people have changed. Young blood has dried up and reappeared. Culture has been created and destroyed again. As in a kaleidoscope, the generations of people with thoughts, hope, and faith were replaced and again went into the realm of oblivion. Nothing remained stationary. Everything varied. Everything changed. The waves of people washed away, dissolved, and sometimes completely destroyed the previous civilizations, rolled uncontrollably, weakened and faded. Nothing lasts forever. Everything passes. Everything is forgotten. The stormy sea, with its ever-surging, proud and mighty waves, constantly changes the face of the earth. The rocks crumble into sand that lies calmly at the bottom. The mountain peaks disappear into the abyss. But the mighty sea itself sometimes meets with resistance in its unstoppable desire. Here it meets the mighty breast of the volcano. With a roar, the mad waves rush. Everything around perishes, the very rocks, the souls of the giant waves. It seems that a little more, and its inevitable death will come. But now, as if waking up, the volcano will sigh with its chest, and waves of lava will rise from its depths, and again it becomes formidable and irresistible. And yet all around, the sea continues its work, and new lands are captured by it, and after a few millennia, the whole country sinks to the bottom of the sea. One volcano remains motionless and grows all the time. The name of the country will be forgotten. The navigator will meet the giant with perplexity, but if he is sufficiently inquisitive, bold, and persistent, then in the layers of ashes he will find the remnants of former times and will be able to comprehend the history of the ill-fated country. So amid the stormy waves of the all-consuming ocean of time, the great monument of the long past stands motionless. Where he came from, where his homeland is, what superhuman genius gave him the power to resist everything, we do not know and probably will not know. But its antiquity, an antiquity fabulous in comparison with the pathetic fragment of history known to us, should already inspire reverence for it. How immeasurably does his greatness grow, how mighty a giant does he become, when it is revealed to our admiring eyes that, apart from the very antiquity of his life, in this monument, the beginnings of all the threads from all the deeds of humanity during his entire planetary life are hidden in mysterious ways. This monument to us Europeans is known by the name of the Holy Book of Thoth, the great arcana of the tarot. Many tens of centuries ago, the race that now reigns on Earth received from its predecessor this great legacy, this great synthesis of human knowledge and the divine revelation available to its genius. She appreciated it, and this monument of divine wisdom formed the essence of all initiations. This great foundation manifests itself in every religion, insofar as it rises above the differential particulars, rises above the conditions of life and time of its people, and reveals from its being the reflection of the absolute teaching of eternal truths. All religions have preserved the memory of one primordial book, written in hieroglyphics by the sages of the first centuries of the world, whose symbols, later simplified and vulgarized, served the scriptures as letters, the word as categories, and occult philosophy as its mysterious signs. There is only one law, one principle, one agent, one truth, and one word. What is at the top is analogous to what is at the bottom. Everything that is the result of quantities and equilibria. The key of hidden things, the key of the sanctuary. This is the sacred word that gives the adept an exalted understanding of occultism and its mysteries. It is the quintessence of philosophies and beliefs. It is the Alpha and Omega. It is the light, life, and wisdom of the universe. The antiquity of this book is lost in the night of time. It is of Indian origin and dates back to an era incomparably older than the time of Moses. It is written on separate sheets that used to be made of the purest gold and mysterious sacred metals. It is symbolic, and its continuations embrace all the wonders of the spirit. Growing old with the passing of the ages, it has nevertheless survived, thanks to the ignorance of the curious, unchanged as far as its character and its basic symbolism are concerned in the most essential parts. These lines are quoted by Helena Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine. Regarding the remark about the Indian origin of the tarot, which is debatable, of course, Blavatsky writes the following. The tarot is said to be of Indian origin because it goes back to the first sub-race of the fifth mother race, before the final destruction of the last remnant of Atlantis. But if it is found in the ancestors of the primitive Hindus, it does not mean that it first appeared in India. Its source is even more ancient, and its trace should be found not here, but in Himalaya, in the snow chains. It was born in a mysterious region, the location of which no one dares to determine, and which causes a sense of hopelessness among geographers and Christian theologians. The area in which the Brahman placed his Kailasa, Mount Meru, and Parvati Pamir. The truth is the same, but it can be approached in different ways, and we of course must choose the path that is most accessible. In its purest form, the divine doctrine embedded in the great ARCANA rests in the dedication of the land of the Hierophants. Here they were expressed with the greatest clarity of consciousness of their greatness. They were the real basis of all religion, while in other countries they were covered with the veil of esotericism. At the same time, the teaching of the sacred land of Kemi is more accessible to our probing spirit, for all European culture developed under its influence, through the Semitic revelation, Judaism and Christianity, and through the mysticism of the occult currents of the West, which openly revered the teaching of Hermes Trismegistus, the great initiate, the founder of Egyptian science and initiation, as the source of all their knowledge. With the invasion of Cambyses, the splendor of Egypt passed into the realm of tradition. For several months, the victorious army did nothing but heat up the pylons and statues, obelisks and bas-reliefs, the age-old creations of the Egyptian genius. They heated with bonfires, then poured cold water on them, in order to achieve their destruction into such fragments which then, being carried in different directions, could be easily destroyed without a trace. In the whole valley of the Nile, there is not a single temple, not a single monument, that has not been touched by the hand of this inflexible executor of the will of fate. Despite their best efforts, the victors only destroyed what should have been destroyed. The deeds of human hands perished, but the spirit of the ancient Hierophants continued to live, hiding in inaccessible shelters. With the reign of the Ptolemies, Egypt once again expanded its ancient power, and the wonder of the world, the lighthouse of Alexandria, like the ancient Sphinx, became the emblem of the land of eternal aspiration, shining with its light, illuminating the whole world on the path of so many centuries. But the hour of destiny had come, and the end of everything had come. Amid the wild shouts of the rabble and the frenzied shouts of fanatics who pretended to be the best servants of the god of light, the ancient Serapis, the stronghold of Egyptian wisdom, fell. Theon and Hypatia sealed with their blood their unselfish devotion to knowledge on the steps of the Temple of Wisdom in Alexandria, which was successive the prey of the fanatical hordes of Omar and Bishop Theophanes. For 6 months bonfires burned in the squares, and baths were heated by hundreds of thousands of papyri that told about the past lives of people, their aspirations, their knowledge, and their discoveries. The light from the ancient Holy Land that had shone for millennia faded. Egypt, its worldwide fame, its greatness, and its immeasurable knowledge, has sunk into oblivion, gone to a place from which there is no return. The truth and the desire for it of man are eternal. There is no power in the world, and there can be no power that can overcome them. The whole world could perish, and only one person could remain in the coming Kali Yuga, but even then the truth would continue to shine meekly in his heart, and his spirit would continue to ardently strive for it. Perished all the splendor of Egypt, perished the temples, perished the stronghold of the wise, who lived by aspirations outside of earthly life. The signs of eternal truth could not perish, it is immortal, and the waves of human madness could not shake it. In the blindness of declaring war on the sky, a person only expels himself from its limits. The absolute and eternal constantly illuminates everything around it. The weak will of man cannot weaken or change its being and light in the slightest. It has only the degree of receptivity of man himself in its power. When his spirit is pure and clear, he can approach the light unself-consciously, and the truth appears before him in the indescribable splendor of its original purity. In the year of the fall, when a confused or still sleeping mind is unable to restrain the raging passions, a person is lost in their satanic chaos and shackles himself hand and foot. The bright face of Isis, which embraces everything in itself, then reflects to his eyes only the whizzing of his follies and torments in all the audacity of their ugliness. Seeing this, and fleeing inwardly, and feeling inwardly the truthfulness of the condemnation, a person throws himself into the abyss with even greater fury, naively thinking to find peace by doing so. The first centuries of the Christian era are, on the one hand, a general revolt of the slaves, and on the other, the appearance on the arena of the world of barbarian, semi-savage peoples. The ancient world was rapidly declining, and with it its gods, its science, and its secrets. Outwardly everything was destroyed, but in reality this catastrophe was only apparent. On the face of Isis, the goddess of truth, a veil descended, darker and more opaque than ever before. The openly preached knowledge took refuge in symbols, legends, and myths, and thus escaping from the eyes of the crowd, it survived the proud kingdom of the pharaohs and spread throughout the world. Astanasastagita says, "The garments of truth change, but the goddess herself and her spirit are unshaken and eternally radiate under the temporary changes of the letter." Only a few decades later, the children of Omar's hordes created a magnificent Arab caliphate. Harun al-Rashid, Ibn Yunus, Nasr ad-Din, Tabitha ben-Kara, and Suleiman began to devote all their energies to restoring the greatness of Alexandrian science. With the victory of Tariq, the Muslim possessions began to move towards Europe. Although Charles Martel at Poitiers put a limit to their political spread, yet the influence of the Arab genius penetrated far, and wandering philosophers, alchemists, and astrologers spread fragments of knowledge everywhere, until the fierce suppression of the Albigenses forced the seekers of truth to begin to hide their aspirations with a thick veil of mystery. Heralds and troubadours, knights errant, and monks of mendicant orders carried the echoes of esoteric mysticism everywhere, from the tournaments of proud vassals to the humble dwellings of the common people. The wars of Jerusalem further strengthened the connection with the Saracens, and if in the west the cross triumphed over the moon, in the east the mystical quest brought down even the ardent fanaticism of the Crusaders. The Knights Templar, in the course of centuries, on the island of Malta, became open seekers in the unknown, and the very execution of Jacques de Molay at the Saint Antoine Gate of Paris, on a slow fire, with his 113 comrades. Philip the Beautiful led only to the creation of the Society of Freemasons, which, with the establishment of the Institute of Maçons Adoptés, was transformed into a Masonic community, which was later bound by the common cause of Weishaupt, and then openly united into a worldwide brotherhood by the work of Albert Pike. Thus, in the course of the centuries, amid the chaos of tribes and peoples, cults and beliefs, external forms and colours, a continuity was maintained, starting with the ancient hierophants of Egypt, passing successively through the Neoplatonists, Gnostics, and the philosophy of the Arabs, Templars, Rosicrucians, Raymond Lull, Paracelsus, Flood, Philaletas, Crolius, Maestreccart, Cornelius Agrippa, Cunrath, Flammel, Pico della Mirandola, Reuchlin, Burma, Giordano Bruno, Martinez de Pasquali, Saint Martin, Fabio d'Olivet, Saint Yves d'Alvedra, Eliphas Levi, Stanislas de Goita, and ending with the modern mystical movement of yogism and theosophy. But how infinitely far is the mysticism of the Illuminati, the Rosicrucians and the Martinists, those wretched representatives of what was once so great a Western initiation from the splendour of the royal science of the Valley of Thebes. From generation to generation, only the letter was passed down. The living spirit had long since departed, and only a few, marked from above, seekers in the recesses of their hearts, recreated the glimmer of the greatness of ancient knowledge. World history has always been divided, and it will continue to be divided into periods of accumulation of facts and periods of their generalization and synthesis. Our era, the last 2,000 years, is just such a period of accumulation of facts and the absence of bright flashes of human genius. We are passing through a sad epoch, to which the ancient Hindus gave the name Kali Yuga, the year of death, because during it only the lower parts of a human being are called to action. The heyday of Egypt is the last echo of the previous race of humanity, which has passed into eternity. The time of Hermes, Rama, Orpheus, and Krishna has passed irrevocably. The task before humanity is to create a new synthesis, even greater and more grandiose than all the previous ones. The fulfillment of this is the mission of the coming millennia. Our task must be to prepare this great work, and therefore, without breaking the connection with the past, we must transform it into our conditions, into our thinking, and, in the light of the ancient synthetic teaching, collect together the data that our science, our experience, and our experiences give us. Unfortunately for the deep, a huge number of mystics did not understand this. They clung to the letter of ancient science, trying to resurrect the past in those forms that, by the will of fate, perished irrevocably. They did not realize that the destruction of ancient civilizations and the complete destruction of all that they had extracted, of course, must have its basis, which is that one page of world history is ended and another begins. The ancient world has done its work, fulfilled its mission completely, and therefore had to move away to allow us, its descendants and successors, to do our work without hindering our freedom and without contradicting our aspirations. Realizing this, instead of bitterness about the past, we will draw from it only great strength, because what some could do, others can do. The connection with antiquity must be great in every seeker after truth, but it must not arise from attachment to the splendor of its form, but from the true splendor of its essence. Thus, our religious rites are as ancient as the world. Our festivals resemble those of our fathers, and the Saviour of the Christians did not come to change the symbolic and religious beauty of the ancient consecration. He came, as he himself said about the forbidding law, to do everything and to fulfill everything. The evangelical system is not a catechism, not an elementary theology, but the highest religious knowledge, the extreme peak of religious thinking, the last stage of theological contemplation. The gospel teaching about God, are joined to those beliefs of the Jewish religion, which at the same time turn out to be the last religious word of the universal human mind, the last limit available to man in his search for divine truth. The beginning of the Christian era is the great moment of breaking with the past. With the spread of Christianity, the connection with the ancient world and its culture everywhere began to fall, and the more individuals sought to stop this gap, the sooner it was made. In order to recreate the greatness of ancient science, the Ptolemies collected in a single repository all that remained scattered around the world, and all this was turned into dust by a single stroke of fate. If it had not been for them, perhaps many manuscripts would have survived to this day, but now everything is irretrievably lost for us. All further attempts in this direction also, always and invariably, led to the opposite result. Marcus Aurelius and Julian only accelerated the destruction of antiquity, causing a reaction, as well as all the mystical schools that sought to preserve the remnants of the knowledge of the ancient sanctuaries on Christian grounds. Julian was not a pagan. He was a Gnostic, attached to the allegories of Greek pantheism, and his misfortune was that he found the name of Jesus Christ less resonant than the name of Orpheus. All religions, sharing the same light among themselves and illuminating one another, give birth to hope and peace in our spirit. The time will come when our descendants will wonder that we did not know what is so clear. Through the darkness of centuries, like the ancient country of Kemi and the valley of the Punjab, a monument of the past shines on us. And just as the proud land of Ra and the pyramids inherited this great gift from the natives of Poseidon, the last remnant of the magical Atlantis, so we, through hundreds of centuries, accept this wonderful light of wisdom from the same ancient land of the Golden City. The pitiful descendants of the great Atlantis, always restless and unable to find anything, persecuted from everywhere, despised by everyone, and making everyone tremble with their song, longing for peace, but not knowing it in their lives, the gypsies, have preserved in their midst this great monument of the homeland of Alaquio Muratar in the form of a deck of playing cards. There is also another book, but although it is in some respects very popular and can be found everywhere, it remains the most mysterious and most unknown of all, because it contains the key to all the others. It is made public, but remains unknown to the people. No one thinks to look for it where it is, and, at the same time, everyone would lose 1,000 times their time looking for it where it is not, if they suspected its existence. This book, older perhaps than the Book of Enoch, has never been translated. It is still written entirely in primitive characters, like the tablets of the ancient. Thousands of years ago, This great monument was depicted in symbols carved in stone in niches separated by columns in the arcane gallery, where the neophyte was initiated and which, according to legend, still exists in its inviolable form in the middle of the path between the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid of Giza. The river of time, in its course, carried away the splendor of the land of the pharaohs, carved out of granite and porphyry. All was lost, but the knowledge of the sages survived him, and now the great immortal symbols rise up before our eyes in the form of an instrument of human amusement. True greatness needs no tinsel glitter. The porphyry is turned to dust. The prophetic images of wisdom have been preserved, and even in this pitiful form they are infinitely greater. The purpose of this work is to restore the world-old synthetic knowledge, the sacred hermetic science. In expounding the supreme teaching, I have, at the same time, outlined its individual doctrines, its individual links, in a few strokes. At the same time, when I set synthesis as my main task, I could not present these doctrines in any exhaustive way, deduce consequences from them, or prove individual propositions. I limited myself to illustrations, references to similar thoughts of different people, different epochs. In their totality, they reveal the main doctrine of my work, the inviolability and immutability of truth on the path of the ages, and therefore its absoluteness. It is my duty to express my deepest gratitude to my two invaluable friends, Nikolai Sergeyevich Musatov, and the railway engineer Vladimir Ivanovich Zhadanov. The first of them, with his fiery spirit, pulled me out of the abyss, showed me the way, and laid the first stone of this work. The second, for a number of years, shared with me all the joys and hardships of the seeker of truth, and only thanks to his selfless service to our common cause, I brought it to the end. Vladimir Shmakov.